This quarterback hated playing quarterback. After a lifetime at the position, Jordan Knox finally gave in to that voice in his head, the one that had been telling him quietly and then loudly that quarterback just wasn't for him. With his father being a legend at the position, that decision came loaded with difficult conversations and an even heavier silence. But there was a school out there willing to take a chance on him, not on a quarterback, but on the player he could become. He was the definition of a project player, but after a long, grueling grind of a freshman season, Jordan saw real growth at receiver and was finally learning to love the sport all over again. The only question left was whether he'd trust that process and run it back with Nevada or bet on himself and go looking for something bigger. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. If you're enjoying the content, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. It truly helps my content reach more and more people, and it only takes a second. But anyway, love y'all and enjoy the video. All things considered, freshman year had been a success, and Jordan couldn't help but feel a quiet pride about that. He'd grabbed a new position by the horn, snagged a few passes, and genuinely made a difference when his number was called. But pride wasn't the only thing he was carrying. A full year away from home and still no contact from his father. Jordan hated how things had been left between them, but he kept circling back to the same question. Was he the one in the wrong here? Surely not, right? He was forging his own path, not the one his father had pre-built for him. But the longer he sat with it, the more it stirred up that old anger, and in that frustration, his next decision became clear. He needed more, he needed bigger, so he was hitting the transfer portal. Shockingly, not a ton of programs came calling. 2 games and a handful of catches, it turns out, wasn't exactly enough to make the leap into the SEC. But hey, you know what they say, shoot for the moon and you'll land somewhere in the Big 12. With his new home locked in, it was time for arguably the most important stretch of the year, the offseason. Jordan wanted to hit the ground running in Cincinnati, and if you want to be the best, maybe you ought to train with the best. So he picked up the phone, and before long, he was in the gym with some familiar faces, his cousins Marcus and Jalen, putting in the work alongside 2 guys who already knew what it takes to win. By the time he stepped foot on campus, coaches could see the difference immediately. The work ethic was obvious, but they weren't just handing out free playing time. He'd need to earn every snap. In practice, you could see this wasn't the same Jordan from a year ago. He was navigating space with more confidence, reading defenders' leverage, and his hands looked sturdy and reliable. The edges were still rough, and his footwork still needed real work, but coaches had seen enough. Jordan Knox would be starting his sophomore year as the wide receiver 3 for the Bearcats, rated a 75 overall and ready to push his limits. And right from the jump, it was clear this was a whole different ballgame. Coaches weren't going to hold his hand or make allowances for the fact he was still learning the position. If he could play, great. If he couldn't, well, the leash was short. Then, before the season had even started, the leash got a little shorter. Week 1 arrived, and as Jordan sat alone in the locker room preparing to take the field for the first time as a Bearcat, his phone buzzed in his hand. He looked down, and what he saw stopped him cold. His father, reaching out for the first time since Jordan had left for Nevada. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then tucked the phone away and headed for the tunnel, but no matter how hard he tried to push it to the back of his mind, it stayed right there, front and center. What did take this seriously even mean? Was that concern? A warning? Did his dad think he was playing games with his own career? But there was no time to sit with it. Cincinnati was opening the year against Boston College, and Jordan had a job to do. Late in the first quarter, with the Bearcats down 7, coach pushed him out there. On 3rd and 7, Jordan lined up in the slot, scanned the defense, found the zone coverage, found the soft spot in the middle, and reeled in his first catch of sophomore year to move the chains. It was the kind of heads-up play he'd always been capable of making, and he was ready to build on it. Except coach kept him on the bench until the 3rd quarter, and by then, Cincinnati was trailing by 2 scores. Jordan got back out there and couldn't move the needle. His QB tossing one up into double coverage didn't help matters either, but that was the game. It was a confusing debut, one that left Jordan with more questions than answers. Maybe coach could see his head was elsewhere, or maybe, just maybe, coach had other plans. Because not long after, Jordan was being pushed into a position battle for wide receiver 2. Wow, that was fast. But Jordan's mind was anywhere but the opportunity in front of him. Back in his dorm that night, he sat staring at his father's text, the one he still hadn't answered. He turned the words over in his head, drafted a response, and erased it twice before setting the phone face down on his desk. Nothing he could say in that moment was going to help the situation, and he knew it. Then his phone lit up again, a teammate hitting him up, wanting to check out a party on campus. Jordan was never really a party guy, but something about that night told him he just needed to get out of his own head. So he grabbed his jacket and went, figuring, what's the worst that could happen? But what started as one drink turned into a few, and a few turned into losing track of time entirely. By the time he got back to his dorm, there were only a few hours before he had to be at the facility. Practice hit him like a truck. Every rep felt like he was running through mud, his hands were off, routes sluggish, and nothing was clicking. Coaches watched from the sidelines, shaking their heads. An early chance to climb the depth chart, and Jordan had quietly and stupidly thrown it away. The following week, they didn't even bother putting him in the game. Message received loud and clear. After a full offseason of grinding, committed to building on what he'd started at Nevada, it felt like he'd taken 100 steps back in the span of 72 hours. So he did the only thing left there was to do. He showed back up in practice with something to prove. And the next opportunity, a matchup against the 5th ranked team in the country, gave him a chance to prove it. USC's defense wasn't giving him anything easy. All those reads and tendencies he'd always been able to spot felt harder to find against this level of competition. So he stopped thinking and started trusting. His footwork, his release, the reps he'd put in all summer, and when the moment came, he planted his foot, created a sliver of space, and made the catch with the corner draped all over him. It was just one play, one first down, but it was against one of the best defenses in the country, and it mattered. And even though Jordan was immediately called back to the sideline, he couldn't help but feel proud. Cincinnati somehow clawed back and snuck out a 1-point win over USC, a program-defining upset. Jordan celebrated on the field with everyone else, but he wasn't satisfied, not even close. 3 weeks into the season and he had what, 2 catches? Not exactly the impact he came here to make. And when reporters approached him asking who was to credit for the upset, what was he supposed to say? Jordan knew he had to make a change before the season really got away from him. So he made a decision, a promise to himself. No more parties, no more letting his father's silence rent space in his head. He was going to be the first one in the building every morning and carry himself like a starter, even if he wasn't one yet. And off the field, the grind didn't stop. Late nights went to homework instead of distractions. It didn't take long for coaches to notice the shift, and when another position battle opened up, Jordan was ready for it. Through sheer will, he earned it. For the first time in his football life, Jordan Knox was the second receiver on the depth chart, a full-time starter. He had clawed his way up from the bottom of the depth chart at Nevada to a starting role in the Big 12, and for one brief moment, he let himself feel that. In a lot of ways, the season was just beginning. Then Kansas State showed up and reminded him exactly how much farther he still had to go. As he took the field, the butterflies were doing flips in his stomach. For the first time ever, Jordan couldn't survive on a handful of reps. He needed to play a full game at a level he'd never reached before. In the Wildcats, corners looked like they'd been studying him for weeks. He got inside leverage on his first target, secured the catch, but came up just inches short of the first down. From there, Kansas State took him away completely, jumping every route, cutting off every lane, refusing to give him any space to work with. After nearly a full half of football, nothing was coming his way, and Cincinnati couldn't find a rhythm. Then, late in the third quarter, going up for a contested ball, he took a hit from 7 defenders at once. A brutal, stunning collision you almost never see in football. He got back up, he stayed in the fight, but the scoreboard kept getting uglier. With Jordan failing to create separation on his side of the field, the QB launched it down the other, but it's tipped and fell right into the hands of the defense. Things were really getting ugly, and for some reason, the Cincinnati sideline was celebrating? Now's really not the time, guys. Jordan was determined to get back on track or die trying. He started stringing together catches, pulling out every trick he had, and for the first time all day, Cincinnati had a little bit of rhythm. But despite some impressive gains, once they reached the red zone, it became clear just how wide the gap still was. These corners looked all pro, and Cincinnati came up empty yet again. Jordan was taking a beating, and even though he came into this one feeling ready, he couldn't help but doubt if he truly was. As the game was nearing a close, Jordan got one more chance, this time deep downfield. It was a 50-50 ball, but as Jordan climbed the ladder, he took another brutal shot, resulting in another interception. Seriously guys, with the celebrating, Cincinnati never stood a chance, and for the Bearcats' newest full-time player, the beatdown took more than a physical toll. The national media dissected his every rep, but Jordan didn't fire back. Instead, he buried himself in the film room and got ready for the next opponent, the next chance. Arizona gave him just that, and he took it. Reading the corner's leverage, planting his foot at exactly the right moment, making the catch, and squeezing through for his first touchdown of sophomore year. To Jordan, the feeling never got old. Every catch still felt like discovering something new. But playing receiver was still undeniably entirely new. There were many moments where he just didn't have it. Rounded routes, losing the ball in the air, gaps in his route tree he hadn't filled yet. The touchdown was real, but so was the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. Cincinnati got back in the win column, but Jordan left the field more frustrated than anything. He still had more to learn, much more. College had a way of keeping football in perspective whether you wanted it to or not. Classes didn't pause for a bad loss, and group projects didn't care about your position on the depth chart. Jordan steered clear of the late night parties, took on more than his share of the workload, including, apparently, Chad's entire portion of the project, and kept grinding. Thanks, man.
6-7!
Then came Colorado, a downpour, a wild crowd, and a game nobody expected Jordan Knox to take over. He knew something was off from his very first snap. His assignment was a drag route, but when he looked upfield, there wasn't a single defender shaded over him. Opportunities like this don't come twice, so he signaled his QB, ripped up the seam, and watched the defense scramble to close the gap, and 56 yards later, on his first catch of the game, Jordan was in the end zone. Then Colorado pushed back and took the lead, and Jordan vanished for most of the first half. But late in the third quarter, with Cincinnati trailing and the rain coming down harder, he found his moment again. Reading the safety blitz before the snap, knowing where the vacancy would open, turning a short catch into a race to the end zone for his second score of the contest. From that point on, his hands felt like magnets. Even in the rain, he was catching everything coming his way. And with Cincinnati still trailing and time falling off the clock, the Bearcats needed to find pay dirt again to have any hope in this one. Inside Colorado's 10-yard line, under a minute to play, a blown coverage left Jordan alone in the end zone. 3 touchdowns, over 100 yards, and this game was going to overtime. For the first time in his life, Jordan genuinely felt like a real receiver. Not a project, not a converted quarterback still finding his footing, but kind of like AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, and guys of that nature. But the problem with feeling like those guys is that you start playing like them too, like nothing can touch you. So on 3rd and forever in overtime, with Cincinnati needing a miracle, Jordan ran a route with 2 defenders on his hip and called for the ball anyway. He couldn't track it through the rain, the defense swarmed, and what's worse is it wasn't just an incomplete pass. Colorado's corner took it back 99 yards for a walk-off touchdown. Yeah, DK Metcalf probably makes that tackle. Jordan was devastated. A career game, statistically the best of his life, and all anyone was talking about was the one play that ended it.
He's got confidence, I'll give him that. But calling for the ball in double coverage with the game on the line, that's not confidence, that's his inexperience. You can't demand the ball when you're completely covered. That's not how you win games, that's how you lose them.
He sat with it alone for a while, letting the noise wash over him. And then, flipping through the channels, a familiar voice came through the radio.
How do you feel about your son's performance at receiver this season?
Look, I think Jordan is still figuring out what kind of player he wants to be. Hopefully he gets there. For the next few weeks, those words followed Jordan everywhere. Every time he lined up, every catch, every score, and underneath all of it, his father's voice. Hopefully he gets there. Not he will, not I believe in him, hopefully. Like the outcome was genuinely uncertain. The season kept moving, and Jordan kept searching for a consistency he couldn't quite find. For every impressive grab, there was a low light right behind it. Cincinnati's record followed the same rhythm. Win, loss, better than his time at Nevada, but still not enough. Then, somewhere in the middle of all the chaos, something shifted. Against Houston, Jordan found himself fighting through another frustrating game, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of a truth he'd been dancing around all season. Even when he was open, one bad throw from his quarterback and the ball was going the other way. His success wasn't entirely in his own hands. It was tied to 11 other people, to timing and chemistry he was still building. That realization stung. He'd spent years as a quarterback making decisions. Now he had to rely on someone else to make them correctly. And sitting in the reality of that, he heard his father's voice again. Look, I think Jordan is still figuring out what kind of player he wants to be. He wasn't sure what kind of player he was trying to be. He didn't have top-end speed to threaten defenses deep, and he didn't have refined footwork to be an elite route technician. Not yet. What he had was his mind, his vision for the game, an ability to read coverage and find soft spots that most receivers couldn't see, because most receivers had never played quarterback. That was his edge. That was what made him different. But instead of leaning into it, he'd been trying to force himself into a mold that didn't fit. He'd been pulling away from his coaches, from his teammates, and people around him were starting to notice. It was time for a reset, starting with the one thing he'd been putting off since week 1. He picked up his phone and typed out a text to his father. He hit send before he could second guess it and felt the weight of something heavy lift off of his chest. It wasn't going to fix their relationship, it wasn't designed to, but it was the first honest thing he'd said to his father in over a year, and that had to count for something. Heading into their last matchup of the season against Texas Tech, Jordan felt lighter than he had all year. The inner battle raging underneath everything since week 1, his father's silence, the identity crisis had quieted, and at least for now, for this game, there was nothing to play for but himself. Texas Tech wasn't interested in making it easy. The Red Raiders held Cincinnati scoreless deep into the third quarter, and Jordan was fighting for every inch. He worked his way over the middle, fought through traffic, and made a diving grab for the first down. Then ripped up the seam and reeled in a catch between 4 defenders. He kept pushing all the way to the goal line on his third catch of the drive before finally boxing out the corner and getting Cincinnati on the board. The defense held and the Bearcats were suddenly alive in this one. Texas Tech adjusted and started punishing Jordan every time the ball came his way, delivering hit after hit the moment he touched it. He held on through all of it, and with a minute to play, he found the soft spot in the zone one more time. He secured the catch, took another shot, and climbed slowly back to his feet. And once he lined up again, there was no ignoring it. For the first time all year, Jordan was striking fear into the heart of the defense. And when Texas Tech adjusted by doubling him, it opened the window for Cincinnati to find the end zone again. We were headed to overtime. Jordan lined up, working toward the end zone on a lofted ball, one-on-one coverage, and a chance to end it. But as he went up to make the catch, the corner went for his legs. Jordan hit the turf hard, and shock rippled through the stadium. He didn't come back out after that, and without the only receiver who'd been consistently moving the ball all night, Cincinnati couldn't finish. Their final game of the season ended in a loss. The locker room afterward was quiet. Jordan sat with the season replaying in his head. Every catch, every mistake, every moment he'd been too far inside his own head to just play football. He'd come to Cincinnati with something to prove, and in a lot of ways, he'd proven it. But the job wasn't done, not even close. He gathered his things and made his way out into the cold night air, and he almost missed him. Isaiah Knox was leaning against a car near the far edge of the parking lot, arms crossed, standing like he'd been there for a while. He never came inside, and he hadn't come to the locker room, but he was there. Jordan stopped walking. Neither of them said anything. The two of them just looked at each other from across the distance. Then Isaiah gave a single small nod, got in the car, and drove away. Jordan didn't know what to do with that. He wasn't sure if it meant forgiveness or pride or anything. But his father had driven to that game. He hadn't come inside and he hadn't said a word, but he'd shown up. And standing there alone in that empty parking lot at the end of a long, hard, complicated season, Jordan Knox decided that was enough to keep going. Junior year was waiting.